All right, thank you very much. Let's kick off. So, thanks for coming to my talk, Tales from the Feed Part 3. Now that I've said that, I actually have no idea what Part 1 even was. Part 2 was all about kind of the building blocks, infrastructure required to build at scale in Azure.
What were you complaining about in
That doesn't narrow it down, Jim. Problems you're likely to encounter when building at scale in Azure. I mean, let's be honest, this is possibly the biggest issue you're going to encounter at scale in Azure, is the cost piece. So, without further ado, let's crack on. Who am I? I'm Sean Corrigan. Thanks for coming, like I said. I spent about 15 years in the end user space. Feels like I've kind of done most jobs in that space at some point. Most recently, I was working at a large Swiss financial where we successfully migrated 110,000 users from on-premises to Windows 11 on Azure. It wasn't all in one hit, it wasn't all that easy, but you know what, we did it. Towards the end of that process, I was talking to Nerdio and I liked the product and I thought it did some really cool stuff. And then I decided to join them. So if you've seen me before, I would have said that I wasn't representing my company. I am representing my company. This talk isn't a Nerdio talk, so don't worry if you're not interested in Nerdio stuff, but you probably should be, especially if you're doing Microsoft bits. So that's my current role, sales engineer for UK and Ireland at Nerdio. And yeah, let's get cracking. So first slide of real content, which is also not real content. Who knows who this guy is? Any thoughts, suggestions? It is indeed Donald Rumsfeld, Defense Secretary for the US, famously said this, and this quote, it wasn't necessarily taken out of context, but he was kind of ridiculed for it unnecessarily. It was treated very unfairly in the press, and I'm not going to come up and support him and his warmongering, but he did say some things, or specifically this one thing that I think is quite important to take on board. In addition to things that you kind of know, there's things that you just don't know about. So the aim of this session is to go through plenty of things around cost in cloud. The reasoning I came up with this whole presentation in the first place was because a few of the talks I've done in the past, people came up to me and said, Sean, thanks for going over some of the kind of really basic stuff. When you're so deep in the weeds, sometimes you kind of forget about some of those basics, and it's nice to kind of be reminded about those in addition to some of the other bits that we weren't aware of. So what Donald said wasn't entirely complete. He only said 3 things. Actually, to complete our favourite thing, the quadrant. Everyone loves the quadrant, whether it's Gartner quadrant, some other made-up quadrant, whatever. So there's known knowns, there's known unknowns, there's unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns. So hopefully that's relatively clear. If it's not clear, don't worry, I'm going to go through those in just a second. So the bits that I'm going to kind of gloss over, because I think you probably already know certain bits. You've got known knowns, that's information that you're already aware of and you understand that. All of my presentations include an element of teaching you to suck eggs. Not because I don't respect my crowd, I respect all of you very highly actually. But like I said in the past, I've received feedback to say, actually it's really good you went over that one thing because we kind of forgot about that was even a thing. So you're going to know some of that stuff. We've got known unknowns. Those are things that you know that you don't know about. You can go off and research those things. You can use your AI. Probably don't use your AI actually. Go and check those things independently to make sure the AI is correct. But those are kind of gaps in your knowledge that you know you can address. So things that you know about but you don't have the data to hand. Go off and get the data. Find out more about it. You can kind of fix that stuff yourself. The things I'm going to concentrate on today is the unknown knowns and the unknown unknowns. So the unknown knowns, when I was putting this together, is actually something really interesting. That's hidden insights that could prove extremely valuable to whatever project you're doing, whether you're putting stuff into cloud, pretty much anything. I mean, this is cloud focused, but it could apply to multiple areas. I'm hoping to remind you about some of the unknown knowns, which is actually, you know what, thanks for mentioning that, Sean, I did already know that, and then you can kind of build that as part of your kind of process. And hopefully, what I'm going to give you is some of the unknown unknowns, so factors that you're not aware of and can't predict tend to be a significant source of uncertainty and risk, and I aim to kind of at least hopefully give you one of these things that you weren't aware of or you hadn't considered, and I just hope that you can take something away from today's session, because I appreciate you giving up all of your time today. So, you're moving to the cloud. What do you need to do to deliver an end user environment in the cloud? If you speak to Mr. Hickling here, you sign up for W365 and you click a few buttons and then you're there. As we all know, there's plenty of stuff that we're doing that's not really in that space. So if you're building an AVD environment, even if you're not building an AVD environment, there's plenty of things that you need to deploy in cloud to deliver some kind of infrastructure that is usable. So we're talking about things like VMs, we're talking about storage, we're talking about backup services for those items, we're talking about any native services within Azure, whether that's database services or function apps or anything like that. We're talking about networking. One of the key points in my previous talk, part 2, is around networks and scaling networks and limitations of your networks. Because if you ain't got a network, you're not going to be able to get anything to work. Piece on monitoring, obviously very important. Is it doubly important because it's not your infrastructure? Who knows, but it's a key piece there. And the final bit, which is super boring, but actually is also mega important and will hugely affect your cost profile, is licensing. So, what are we talking about here? Let's go through some of these kind of known knowns quite quickly. So we've got some of the obvious costs. We've got the compute usage, whether that's individual virtual machines or the various container platforms that are available on Azure. Obviously, all of those have some kind of associated cost. The cost obviously keeps growing and growing and growing the bigger and bigger you go. So obviously, it's key to stay on top of some of those kind of headline costs. Some of the Azure platform services, they obviously are going to cost money. App service, logic and function apps, all of kind of the managed SQL, all of those kind of things, all going to cost you money. Storage, obviously again, I mean all of these are obvious, that's the part of the slide. Storage, you're going to be paying for some level of performance, you're going to be paying for some amount of storage or both, so obviously that's something you need to be aware of. Any snapshots and backups for your storage, that is also going to increase your costs because you're not going to get any free lunch there. Networking data egress costs for data leaving Azure. I've put a little thing there saying even if it's not really leaving Azure, so we'll kind of dive into some of those extra ones in a second around that, because for me that's one of the trickier bits. Networking devices, like I said, when you're thinking about some of your networking design pieces, how you're actually going to get stuff to hang together, how you're going to get that to talk to any items that you have on-prem, how you're going to get some pieces of infrastructure to talk out from the internet. You're going to need some networking devices like your kind of virtual network gateways for ExpressRoute, VPN gateways, NAT gateways, load balancers, all that kind of stuff is all going to cost you money. Log analytics and monitoring services, again, are all going to cost you money. And licensing, an obvious cost, but one kind of tip there was around, are you already covered for things? I've seen quite a lot of instances where people have mistakenly started paying for multiple different items, and actually they don't need to. They've already, I don't know, let's just say they've got kind of a E5 license and they've already got all of the bits that they need covered, they're going off and spending additional money on some bits that they don't necessarily need. Those are the obvious costs. I'm sure most of you here are aware of all of those and what the implications of those are. So I kind of wanted to draw some attention to some of the less obvious costs, some of the hidden costs, some of the things that maybe you weren't aware of or aren't entirely obvious, or at least they weren't obvious to me when I went through this exercise over the last 2 to 3 years. Identical SKUs may not be the same price in each region of a region pair, or even outside of a region pair. So if you've got resources in, I don't know, UK South, and you've also got similar resources running in UK West, in addition to arguably saying that UK West is the lesser sibling, it doesn't have availability zones, there's some services that aren't there. Just be aware that sometimes the VM SKUs that you're using in your kind of primary region, don't assume that the cost in your secondary region is going to be the same, because that's not actually always true. A problem that we ran into massively at scale, mainly because we weren't really thinking about it and no one kind of considered it or was given time to consider it, and we kind of went in a bit knee-jerk. If you're using certain technologies, you will be backing off IOPS. So some of the most obvious ones that come to mind, if any of you guys are using something like Citrix DAS, and you're using something like MCSIO, and you're using your RAM to kind of take the hit of a lot of those writes, you're probably going to be okay using something like standard hard disk. This particular example, we for a number of reasons, ended up having to move to a non-MCSIO backed set of machines, and we decided to put the machines onto standard SSD, which is fine. And actually, we were like, oh, maybe the cost will just net out because we only need one standard SSD, and with the MCSIO model, we had to have 2 standard HDDs, so it was kind of cost neutral. Then the bill came in, and we quite quickly found out that we hadn't considered the fact that the standard SSD actually has additional transaction costs on top of that once you reach a certain point. And it was very split, actually. We saw, I don't know, probably 2/3 of the machines, 3/4 of the machines, they were absolutely fine on that standard SSD kind of profile / tier. But the remaining kind of 25% there, they were regularly breaking out of that model, and actually they were hitting the disks quite hard. And it would have been cheaper for us to put those machines onto premium SSD. Now, what's going on here now? No one pressed any buttons on it. Oh, right. Yeah. Engineer. So even though the premium SSD is actually 4 times the price of the standard HDD in a lot of instances, it kind of paid for itself because we didn't have to pay those extra transaction fees. Hello.
So when you were breaking down the money, was that because mainly of using that flow project originally, so like Mac?
It was mainly app-based.
Okay.
Particular groups of apps were hitting the disk particularly hard locally. We also use Cloud Cache, so if there's obviously any extra activity that's happening there, that would doubly hit the disk there as well. Right. Yeah, that's it, right? So, yeah, I'm just making you aware that there's potential hidden costs there. So just be aware. If you're asking me for how you can predict what that is likely to look like that, I can't tell you. You're just going to need to be on top of some of your apps and your machines and just pay attention to what's actually happening on those disks. Azure Storage Data Replication, there's some really cool stuff in there. Microsoft have made it super easy in a lot of instances to just magically make your storage appear in multiple locations. It doesn't include the transfer costs, so just be aware if you get a little bit happy and you decided to start dumping a load of data in a region and you also set up replication because it's 2 clicks of a button, just be aware if you're dumping a lot of data in there, you're going to have to pay for that data to come across. Again, it's a very similar story around this. Most of this is related to data. Azure Monitor and Log Analytics is great. Again, super cool resource, really useful. There's a lot of good data in there, but it can generate a lot of data per VM. So just be conscious that you're aware of kind of the load that you're placing upon those things to try and reduce the usage. Policies may be heavy-handed. Be careful what will apply. You might be thinking, what on earth are you talking about policies that don't cost anything because they're policies? Again, I'm referring to a particular incident that occurred, and there was a policy that was applied at the root level for security reasons by the security team, because they go off and do security things. I'm sure we all have lots of fun stories to talk about security teams. And this particular policy meant that every single subscription would have a policy for Windows Defender for Server applied to it. If you have been in this space for any period of time, you will understand that most of the machines we're deploying today are not Windows Server. They are Windows client operating systems of the 10 or 11 variety. However, Microsoft does not care that your client OS is not supported properly by Defender for Server, and it will just charge you per VM for every instance of Defender for Server that is deployed into the subscriptions that are hit by that policy. At that point in time, they had about 250 subscriptions, each with somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 machines deployed in them. So as you can imagine, the bill was slightly unexpected at the end of the month when it was, let's just say, somewhere in the mid 6 figures for that. So be very careful about any policies, especially ones that you're not in control of. Get the communication links open, speak to people, tell them the impact of what their policy is causing. Obviously, if there's a huge commercial impact, people will be willing to fix things quicker, in my experience. So the next 3 things are all kind of network-related pieces, really. So virtual networks are free. There's a lot of really good virtual networking options within Azure. But peering the VNets, even in the same region, will not only attract egress, but also ingress costs at the other end. The costs between regions are even higher, depending on which regional zone they are in. So I'm not talking about availability zones, I'm talking about the kind of regional zones that are defined within Azure. There's 6 different ones there, and there are different costs for your data transfer, depending on if you're going between items in the same zone or if you're transferring data between different zones. So just be very careful for that one. That's a big one, especially if you're going between those regional zones. There's quite a high cost associated per gigabyte with those. Again, data transfer within a region is free, but it's going to incur the same cost as peered VNets if you're using the same subnet across availability zones. So as soon as you leave that availability zone and you're wrapping stuff into a different one, again, you're going to incur charges at each end for that, which is not something people are that familiar with. Private link, great service. A lot of people are just deploying that as standard now. Try and keep as many of the services kind of on your private network as possible. Makes a lot of sense. But just be aware that deploying private endpoints and, again, the data transfer costs, they are present there. The private link is free. The things that you want to use on top of that are not free at all. One of the things I go back to all the time in most of my talks, planning is absolutely key for anything. It's key to kind of architecture, design, it's key to deployment, it's key to engaging teams, it's key to your communications with users, teams, whoever. Planning is absolutely critical for pretty much everything, in my experience. So don't be afraid to push back sometimes if it's going to enable you to do a bit of better planning. Sometimes you're not going to be able to do that. There's going to be some unknown factors there, and you're just going to have to run with it for a bit. But where can planning help? Planning can help you absolutely in kind of some of these right-sizing discussions. Make sure your VMs are right-sized. If you're only expecting someone to run Office, don't give them a 64-core machine of 128 gig of RAM. That's insane. I'm not saying anyone in this room would do that, but there's a lot of instances where we go in and we see massively over-provisioned environments, right? Just be very conscious of that. Avoid orphan and unused resources, things like unattached disks, stale snapshots, images, unused public IPs. There's a whole plethora of things. This is just a very small amount of things that can kind of, hello?
Well, I think that often results from a lot of people, and they have no idea that this is not doing it, people are using it to delete something. I don't know what might happen if I don't use it.
Yeah. Okay.
What methodology did you use to verify what the results were all of them and that they were definitely not
do you want the long answer or the extra long answer? It's tricky. One of my core building blocks is do stuff as code, use your pipelines. You will very quickly begin getting used to that world, and you will begin to get into a situation where you kind of understand its completeness, because if you haven't deployed it using the pipeline, it's not going to be there. And next time you run the pipeline, if there's something there, it's probably going to get cleaned up. If you're talking about kind of sprawling existing environments there, I don't really know, to be honest with you. Yeah, I was just about to say Azure Advisor has some suggestions around. I mean, that's a great solution. Why would you not use Nerdio if you're deploying ADB?
It's a fundamental membership, so what you try to manage those stuff when you're that is
Yeah. Yeah. It's so another part of. Yes, I mean, certainly when I was in the bank, there was no human access to the portal at all in terms of being able to remove stuff. Everything had to be done through pipelines. So that's a very rigid environment in terms of kind of security and making sure people can't do that stuff. Yeah, absolutely lean on your tooling. The tooling's there for a reason. All of the tooling does weird and wonderful stuff. Citrix will go off and create 1 million machines and then delete them all and not the disks, but you kind of need the disks, otherwise the machine doesn't know what it is. So yeah, absolutely, that's a great point. Lean on your tooling, make sure that that's kind of operating effectively. Yeah, just pay attention. Sometimes we're not really given the room or the time to pay attention to some of that stuff, but try to. Just have a look. You can set up your budgets. If you see massive increases, have a look and see why. Use appropriate performance tiers of storage. Again, this is just standard over provisioning stuff. Check performance. What do you need? Have you deployed some massive storage share that doesn't need performance and doesn't need that amount of storage? This is all really basic stuff, right? But this is this kind of stuff that sometimes just gets missed because it's so basic. For storage, I mean, it's an impossible question, Lee, that no one's answered yet. This is being filmed. Design appropriate network topologies. What do I mean by that? I mean, have a think about some of those things that I raised around those costs that you may or may not have been aware of. Try and limit your interzonal transfers, try and limit some of your interregional transfers. just be conscious, be aware of what you're doing. Don't think just because it's 2 clicks of a button, it's just going to look after itself. It's not going to look after itself. It's just going to do what you tell it to do. So just be very careful around that. Around the kind of log analytics piece, which is a really big one in terms of kind of unbridled cost, apply a level of intelligence to it. Capture only the relevant data. There's a lot of data to be captured in there. If you don't need the data, if you're not going to use the data, don't capture it. It's just sat there taking up resources. It's costing you money. Be savvy around your DR and backup strategy. I feel like this is really important, especially in the AVD space. How much do you really need to back up? Can you get away with, if there was some kind of incident, just going off and building a load of stuff? What does the business want you to do? Because I can guarantee if your outlook is, oh, we're just going to build a load of stuff and then pay for it to just sit there and do nothing, that is going to be less attractive to most businesses than saying, you know what, if there is a DR incident, we're going to be able to get 5% of the users up and running in 4 minutes and the rest of them will be running in an hour or two. So make sure you're having those conversations around your DR and backup strategies and just make sure they align with what the business is actually deeming to be important at that point. Apply discounting strategies like reserved instances or Azure savings plan. I won't go into the details of those 2 different things, but they're not always appropriate. It can be quite difficult to make them work in a transient AVD type environment. Obviously, if you're talking about quite static server workloads, absolutely look at things like reserved instances or savings plan. Just be aware of some of the caveats. Again, I'm not going to give an exhaustive list of them, but things like being stuck on a SKU family, being stuck in a region, for those reserved instances, just be aware that some of those things are kind of restricted and you are tying yourself down to those restrictions for a certain period of time, so it will make your platform less dynamic, which is counter to one of the reasons why you went to cloud in the first place. So, what are my top 10 tips for cost savings on Azure, specifically around end user compute? So, yeah, first one. Plenty of tooling out there. Obviously, you've got Azure Advisors kind of built in. Use that to identify some of those optimal resource SKUs. Have a look. Make sure stuff is actually being utilized. And you know what, if it's not, downsize it. Choose the appropriate item for your workload. Like I said, this is all really basic stuff. Create and assign scaling plans that align with the work patterns of your user estate. There's no point, obviously, turning machines on when they're not required. And just tailoring it to your environment. We've gone to a very different world now, I think, from on-prem, where you just kind of set a load of stuff going, you don't really care about turning it off. Obviously, kind of hooks into that. What I've seen, having now joined a company in the vendor space, Americans don't really care about ESG and sustainability and all that kind of stuff. Is that a governmental thing? Is that an attitude thing? I don't know. I'm not here for political commentary, but let's just say that in Europe there's much more of a keener focus on those kinds of things. Yeah. Just keep putting more holes in the ground. Yeah, it's not going to run out yet, so we're fine. That's going to help with some of those conversations as well. So it's not just the costing or financial costs, it's the environmental piece. UBS, where I worked before, they worked very closely with Microsoft around ESG things, carbon calculators. There's an API in Azure for that stuff now. So if that is important to the businesses you're working with, make sure they're looking at that kind of stuff, because that's going to help in terms of cost savings, and it's going to provide business outcome driver for some of these really high level, quite weird CEO targets around net zero and all that kind of stuff, which is important in Europe. So just be aware of that. Try to use as few golden images as possible. Had a great chat with Jim about this yesterday, and the app proliferation problem, and that it is potentially an exponential problem because of the more users you have and the more apps you have, the combinations of users and apps is going to get more and more complex. Look at using virtualized application delivery solutions. There's plenty out there. So I won't make a personal recommendation, but I think most of them that I've seen recently, they're all pretty good. So
Look, I'm not here to plug my own feature.
yeah, so absolutely. So yeah, no personal bias, but yeah, of course, great thought, Toby. If you're using the very popular Microsoft format, which has 4 or 5 apps ready, you can use that. But yeah, of course, if you've got app volumes, Liquidware or Umescent, all really good. They're all pros and cons, but generally speaking, it's going to really allow you to kind of downsize that golden image estate and get to a point where you can kind of spend less time and less resources creating 10, 15, a million golden images. I recently spoke to a customer with under 200 users, and they had 100 golden images, which was quite amusing. As a reference point, I went back to them and said, you should probably consider virtualizing some of your apps, because at the bank we had 3 images supporting 160,000 potential users, which is obviously the other end of the spectrum. Keep your related resources in the same region where possible. That's obviously going to kind of really keep down that profile of transferring data here, there, and everywhere. Obviously, there are some instances where you're going to have to do inter-regional transfers for whatever reason, your DR, your backup, etc. That makes sense, but just be aware of those costs there. Collect only the relevant logs with an appropriate sample rate. Like, if there's stuff that's not changing regularly, don't take a snapshot of that data every 5 seconds. It's going to bring you 0 benefits there, and it's going to massively increase your log size. Was this yours, Jim? FS Logic's disk compaction.
Yeah, it was.
Ensure that it's enabled. It is enabled by default, but I mean, people do all kinds of crazy stuff, so make sure it's enabled. That will obviously kind of save a lot of your storage costs. Ensure you're not over-provisioning your storage for capacity or performance. Kind of going back to that sizing piece and the disk piece. There is perhaps an argument to be made to say, actually, you know what, maybe you use Cloud Cache. You use the Cloud Cache to give you your performance, and then you won't need to over-provision your storage in the back end to get the performance you need for your desktop. Again, your mileage may vary, it's very individual, it depends heavily on your app estate, but it's something worth considering. Tailor your backup policies to satisfy the relevant business RPO and RTO requirements. Make sure you're using the right storage tiers. There's no point backing up to something that's super hot and just paying loads of money for that. It just doesn't make any sense. In test and dev, depending on how critical your test and dev environments are, automate some shutdowns out of hours. Take those resources down. Don't just let them run. Don't let your weird and wonderful developers go off and create 1 million machines and just not turn any of them off. And kind of hand in hand with that, my 9th top tip is to implement Azure policies to kind of put those guardrails up and restrict what people have access to do. Because you know what? If you don't put the guardrails up, they're just going to go and pick some massive thing that's going to cost you £1,000 a month. So be sure to kind of implement those to restrict access to those expensive resources. And yeah, make sure you're setting budgets within Azure and some kind of cost alerts to really provide some kind of cost governance there. If you're not doing that today, you're going to be in real trouble. So, the sharper of those of you in the room may have noticed that my top 10 tips is missing tip number 10, which is where I introduce today's very special guest, Alistair Crawford from Auxilium IT. So please come up and deliver some real value. So yeah, just right. Yeah.
Well, thanks guys. I know I'm going to stand in front of the microphone. There we go. Should do it. So yes, I'm Alistair Crawford, one of the founders at Auxilium IT here, and I'm going to bore you to tears talking about Azure Server licensing. Don't go to sleep on me. It'll be literally 3 slides, and I'm done, and I'll hand back to Sean. From the offset, I'm going to credit this knowledge to Gregor Suti, who's a Microsoft MVP, part of the Azure user group in Glasgow. And he's brought this out. Some of you may or may not know that about Microsoft's best kept secret about 2.5 years ago. They introduced Server 2025 subscription licensing. But what they didn't tell people was that also included hybrid usage benefits for Azure. Now, if you're buying Azure at the moment for any server workloads, we're not talking about AVD here, just server workloads. Let's see this one should come up. Yep, okay. It's saving money, it's not an ESA agreement. Now, the enterprise subscription agreements are the large things for large organizations, which Microsoft and their providers make a lot of money off, which is fair enough. It's the Azure Server 2025 subscription. It's an 8-core license, which is the minimum you need for Azure. Any VM in Azure, if you're going to provide a license for it, it has to have 8 cores within it. And you can buy them in 2 cores to get to a 10-core, a 12-core, whatever. And there's 2 scenarios I'm going to give you. I'm going to tell you about the first one. It's a public sector organisation in Scotland. They had 5 machines running RDS because the application's on them. They had 12 cores correctly sized in each of these servers, and they were paying, with an ESA, £49,000, which is pretty normal, over 3 years. We switched them to Azure Server 2025. Anybody want to take a guess at how much they saved? You can't answer this, Toby, because I told you. Somebody take a guess, go on, take a rough punt. 50%? Who thinks they saved 50%? Good man. You're completely wrong, unfortunately. It cost them £5,050. 49 grand down to 5,050. It is the best kept secret in Microsoft at the moment. And here is another. Oh, sorry. So it's released into the CSP channel, but it's available through all your resellers. And they never made a big announcement about it. I can't think why. And yeah, depending on the number of cores that you are licensing with this, you can save up to 90% of the licensing. A couple of caveats here. It has to be the same subscription. So if you've got 5 machines and 1 subscription, you have to use that subscription when you allocate the licenses, because that's how Microsoft track the usage of this as well. And the other caveat is that current licensing in Azure is pay as you go. So if you turn that machine off, you do not pay the Windows license. If you commit to 3 years, like this public sector customer did at £5,000, if you got rid of those machines and you didn't allocate, they're not tied to the machine, you can allocate them to other VMs in Azure, you're left with them for the 3-year period. You can't, there's no swap seat, you can't give everything back, and it's cheaper than the ESA, right? Come on, yes, 12 or 36 months again. So this is a real world example. One customer, small customer, 45 users, engineering company based in Scotland. They had their DC, they had their file server, and they had their SQL server running these here. Now this is the US dollar amount, which I've converted into, I know I'm going to get out the video and the thing here, I'll do this slide anyway. So it's £601 a year for a standard D2 2-core machine, £263 for the same license. Again, these are all the same because it's 8 core, that's what you buy. A 4-core, as you can see here, so you're saving 56% on a 2-core machine, you're saving 78% on a 4-core machine, and you're saving, this is 89%, it's actually 93. These are 12-month figures. If you put that over 3 years, it would be £224 a year. And if you take the difference here, it's £3,000, 81% cheaper overall for them. And over the 3 years, they save 10 grand, and that's with 3 VMs in Azure. So 3 VMs in Azure of a 2, a 4, and an 8 core over 3 years using this licensing, they save 10,400. And believe it or not, that's me done. There you go, mate. So talk to me after if you want to know about it, but Azure subscription licensing is the quickest way to save real money. 2 different things are, it's not pay as you go, but it is a commit, 12 or 36 months, but given the savings, even if you only stood it up for a year, you'd be thousands within. There you go, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. I didn't know about this at all until Alistair raised it with me a few months ago. Just blew my mind. It is server only, yeah. But if you're on Azure, there's a good chance you're going to be running a lot of service there as well for something. Thanks for coming. Hopefully you enjoyed and got something out of that. Has anyone got any questions at all around what was presented? Any other random questions? Hello? Cool. All right, thank you. Any more questions at all? Grand. All right, thank you very much. Scan the code on the left if you want to connect to me on LinkedIn. Does the one on the right work, Neil? I mean, have a go scanning the one on the right. Maybe it will download and inject some malware that Neil sorted out. Who knows? This is the first time I've done this talk, so please leave feedback in the Canopy app. I do really value the feedback. The reason this presentation exists is because of the feedback I've got from previous ones. So please be brutally honest. I can take it, I think. Feel free to grab either of us for a chat afterwards. I did put that in, but actually I have to dash off to get a plane, so I'll be hanging around for 30 minutes, but Neil's going to be taking over with all kinds of exciting stuff for that period of time. So yeah, stay for the panel and then I've got to shoot off. But yeah, any questions about Nerdio, anything like that, please look me up on LinkedIn and connect, and we can have a chat there. All good. Thank you very much.
Sure.